A millionaire disguised himself as a poor man and went to the agency to buy a luxury house. But upon entering, he was immediately humiliated. Then what he did 2 days later left everyone shocked. Subscribe to the channel to follow more exciting stories like this one. The morning fog wrapped around London's most prestigious buildings like a silk scarf, creating an ethereal atmosphere that perfectly matched Oliver Sterling's mood. At 42, he had built an empire in real estate development, yet something felt missing. Standing before his floor-to-ceiling mirror in his penthouse apartment, he carefully applied the finishing touches to his disguise: worn jeans, scuffed boots, and a shabby coat that had seen better days. His best friend and business partner, Marcus Chen, watched with a mixture of amusement and concern. "Are you sure about this, Oliver? There are other ways to evaluate potential business partners." Oliver ran a hand through his newly disheveled hair, deliberately messing up the usually impeccable style. "Numbers and reports don't tell the whole story, Marcus. I need to know who these people really are, not just who they pretend to be in board meetings." The disguise was perfect. Gone was the polished real estate mogul worth billions, replaced by someone who looked like they could barely afford a cup of coffee. Oliver's plan was simple yet unprecedented. He would visit Kensington Crown Properties, the luxury real estate agency he was considering for a massive partnership deal, posing as a man of modest means. As he made his way through the streets of Mayfair, Oliver couldn't help but notice how differently people treated him. The usual respectful nods were replaced by averted gazes and subtle sneers. It was enlightening, if somewhat disheartening. Kensington Crown Properties occupied a pristine Georgian building, its windows showcasing photographs of some of London's most expensive properties. Oliver pushed open the heavy glass door, instantly aware of the contrast between his appearance and the opulent surroundings. The reception area was a study in understated luxury: cream marble floors, elegant modern furniture, and tasteful art pieces. Behind the curved desk sat a young woman with warm brown eyes and an open expression. Her nameplate read Emma Thompson. Before Emma could speak, a tall man in an impeccable suit approached, his face twisted in barely concealed disdain. "Can I help you?" The tone suggested he'd rather do anything but. "Actually," Oliver began, maintaining the slight working-class accent he'd practiced, "I'm interested in viewing some properties." A second agent, shorter but equally well-dressed, joined his colleague. "Sir, I believe you may have the wrong address. Perhaps I can direct you to some more suitable agencies." Emma's voice cut through the tension like a warm knife through butter. "Please have a seat, sir. I'd be happy to discuss our available properties with you." Her smile was genuine, her manner professional and welcoming. The two agents, whose name tags identified them as Richard Blake and James Harrison, exchanged meaningful looks. Richard cleared his throat. "Emma, dear, I don't think that's necessary. Surely you can see—" "What I can see," Emma interrupted politely but firmly, "is a potential client who deserves our full attention and respect." She stood from her desk and gestured to a comfortable seating area. "Would you like some tea while we discuss your requirements?" Oliver settled into the plush armchair, watching as Richard and James retreated to their offices, muttering under their breaths. Emma brought him a cup of perfectly prepared tea, 1 sugar, splash of milk, exactly as he would have requested in his usual guise. "Now then," she said, opening a leather-bound portfolio, "what sort of property are you looking for?" Over the next hour, Emma treated Oliver with unfailing courtesy and professionalism. She listened attentively to his requirements, offered thoughtful suggestions, and never once showed any sign that she questioned his ability to afford the properties they discussed. Throughout their conversation, Oliver observed the office dynamics. Richard and James made several passes through the reception area, each time throwing disapproving glances their way. He also noticed how other staff members seemed to take their cues from the two senior agents, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere. Emma, however, remained unruffled. She maintained her warm professionalism, even when Richard deliberately interrupted their conversation to remind her about more pressing matters. Her response was a masterclass in graceful boundary setting. "Thank you, Richard, but I'm with a client at the moment. I'll attend to other matters once we've finished here." As their meeting drew to a close, Emma handed Oliver her business card. "Please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions, and—" She lowered her voice slightly. "Please don't let today's experience discourage you." Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of appearances. Oliver left the agency with mixed emotions. The contrast between Emma's behavior and that of her colleagues was stark, and exactly what he'd been looking for. As he walked back to his car, parked several blocks away, he pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus. "Well?" his friend asked without preamble. "We've got work to do," Oliver replied, already planning his next move. "But I think I've found someone rather extraordinary." What Oliver didn't realize as he drove home to change back into his usual attire was that this simple test would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just a company, but the lives of everyone involved, especially his own. The following morning, Emma Thompson arrived at Kensington Crown Properties earlier than usual, her mind still dwelling on the mysterious client from the previous day. There had been something about him, a certain presence, an intelligence in his eyes that seemed at odds with his shabby appearance. As she arranged her desk for the day ahead, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to that interaction than met the eye. Her contemplation was interrupted by the clicking of expensive shoes on marble. Victoria Blackwood, the agency's managing director, strode through the front doors with unusual urgency. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair and tailored Chanel suit projected authority, but there was tension in her normally composed features. "Emergency meeting in the conference room. Everyone. Now." Victoria's voice carried across the office, leaving no room for discussion. Emma watched as Richard and James exchanged worried glances before following their boss upstairs. In the conference room, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The large screen on the wall displayed a paused video feed from the previous day's security cameras. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she recognized her shabby client in the freeze frame. Victoria stood at the head of the table, her expression grave. "Yesterday, we had a visitor. What none of you knew, what I didn't know, was that this visitor was Oliver Sterling." A collective gasp filled the room. Even Emma, usually composed, felt her hands trembling slightly. Oliver Sterling wasn't just any developer. He was the developer in London's luxury real estate market. His projects were legendary, his influence unprecedented. "Mr. Sterling was conducting a test," Victoria continued, pressing play on the video. The room watched in painful silence as the events unfolded on screen. Richard and James's dismissive behavior seemed even worse in replay, while Emma's consistent professionalism stood out in sharp contrast. "This morning, I received 2 emails," Victoria announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "The first was from Sterling Development Group, announcing their intention to terminate all potential business relationships with our agency." She paused, letting the devastating news sink in. "The second was from Mr. Sterling himself." She began reading from her tablet. "While yesterday's experience initially led me to withdraw completely from any partnership considerations, one of your employees demonstrated the exact values and professional standards that I seek in business associates." Emma Thompson's behavior was exemplary, showing that excellence can exist even in a flawed system. Emma felt all eyes turned to her. She sat straighter, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the sudden attention. "Mr. Sterling has proposed a conditional second chance," Victoria continued. "His terms are unusual but non-negotiable." Richard leaned forward, his usual arrogance somewhat diminished. "What terms?" "First, a complete overhaul of our customer service protocols. Second," Victoria looked directly at Emma, "he wants Ms. Thompson to lead this transformation." The room erupted in whispered conversations. Emma felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. She, a receptionist, leading a company-wide transformation? "This is absurd," James burst out. "She's just a receptionist. She has no management experience, no—" "She has something far more valuable," a new voice interrupted. Oliver Sterling himself stood in the doorway, now impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than Emma's annual salary. "She has integrity, empathy, and an innate understanding of how people should be treated." The room fell silent as Sterling walked to the front, his presence commanding attention without effort. "Yesterday, I saw 2 faces of this company. One was elitist, exclusionary, and short-sighted." His gaze fell heavily on Richard and James. "The other demonstrated the values that build lasting success in any business: respect, professionalism, and genuine customer care." He turned to Emma, his expression softening slightly. "Ms. Thompson, would you be willing to take on this challenge? It won't be easy. You'll face resistance, skepticism, perhaps even sabotage. But you'll have my full support, and that of your managing director." Emma felt the weight of the moment, aware that her answer would change not just her own life, but the future of the entire agency. She thought of all the times she'd wished she could change the company's culture, make it more inclusive, more genuine in its service. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and confident. "I would be honored to accept this responsibility." Oliver nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Excellent. Victoria, I'll have my team send over the partnership paperwork this afternoon. Ms. Thompson, I'd like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss your vision for this transformation." As the meeting dispersed, Emma caught Richard and James huddled in a corner, their expressions dark with resentment. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but something told her it would be worth every challenge. What she didn't realize was that this was just the beginning of a journey that would test her in ways she never imagined, and that Oliver Sterling's interest in Kensington Crown Properties, and in her, went far deeper than anyone suspected. Emma stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office, still struggling to process the whirlwind of changes that had transformed her life in the past 48 hours. The space, formerly a conference room on the top floor of Kensington Crown Properties, now served as her headquarters for implementing the cultural transformation Oliver Sterling had mandated. Her desk, a sleek piece of modern furniture that had been delivered that morning, held a stack of personnel files and company protocols awaiting her review. The responsibility felt overwhelming, yet somehow right. A gentle knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning to find Oliver Sterling entering the room carrying 2 cups of coffee from the artisanal cafe down the street. "I thought you might need this," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Oat milk latte with a dash of vanilla?" Emma accepted the coffee with surprise. "How did you know my order?" A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I notice things. It's a habit that served me well in business." He gestured to the sitting area by the window. "Do you have a moment to discuss your plans?" As they sat, Emma couldn't help but notice how different he looked from the shabby figure who had walked into the agency just days ago. Yet something in his eyes remained the same, that keen intelligence she had sensed even through his disguise. "I've been reviewing the current protocols," Emma began, pulling out a tablet with her notes. "The issues run deeper than just Richard and James's behavior. The entire incentive structure promotes elitism and competition over genuine service." Oliver leaned forward, his interest evident. "What would you change first?" "The commission structure," she replied without hesitation. "Currently, agents are rewarded solely based on property values. I propose implementing a client satisfaction component and team collaboration metrics." "That won't be popular with the top sellers," Oliver observed. "No, it won't. But if we want lasting change—" Emma paused as a movement caught her eye. Through the glass walls of her office, she spotted Richard watching them, his expression unreadable. Oliver followed her gaze. "You'll face resistance. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm more concerned about subtle undermining than open opposition," Emma admitted. "This morning I found my email had been mysteriously removed from the senior staff distribution list, and my access to certain databases was accidentally revoked. Technical glitches can be fascinating, can't they?" Oliver's tone was dry. "Especially when they only affect certain people." Their eyes met in shared understanding, and Emma felt a sudden flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with work concerns. She quickly looked down at her notes. "I'd like to start with a comprehensive training program," she continued professionally. "Not just customer service basics, but emotional intelligence, implicit bias recognition, and genuine relationship building." "Excellent. I know just the person to help you develop that curriculum." Oliver pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. "My sister, Charlotte, runs a consulting firm specializing in organizational psychology. She'll be an invaluable resource." As they discussed further details, Emma became aware of a subtle shift in the office dynamics, visible through her glass walls. People were gathering in small groups, throwing curious glances their way. She could almost feel the speculation building. "They're wondering why you're spending so much time with me," she said quietly. Oliver's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sparkled with amusement. Let them wonder. I invest time in things and people I believe in." The way he said it made Emma's cheeks warm slightly. She was saved from responding by another knock at her door. Victoria entered, looking somewhat flustered. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation," she announced. "Someone has leaked details of our new partnership to the press, including some creative interpretations of recent events." Oliver's expression hardened. "Show me." Victoria handed over her tablet, displaying a business news website. The headline read, "Sterling Development Group forces dramatic shake-up at luxury real estate agency. Inexperienced receptionist given leadership role in controversial decision." Emma felt her stomach drop as she read the article, which painted her promotion as a publicity stunt and questioned her qualifications. The story was peppered with quotes from anonymous inside sources, suggesting that the agency's reputation would suffer under her leadership. "Well," Oliver said, his voice dangerously calm, "it seems some people are determined to make this transition more interesting than necessary." He turned to Emma. "How would you like to handle this?" Emma straightened in her chair, her initial shock giving way to determination. "First, we find out who leaked this, not for revenge but because we need to know who we're dealing with. Second, we use this as an opportunity to publicly announce our new direction, on our own terms." Oliver's face broke into a genuine smile. "Ms. Thompson, I believe you're going to exceed even my expectations." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "Victoria, arrange a press conference for tomorrow morning. It's time we introduced London to the new face of Kensington Crown Properties." As they left her office, Emma sank back in her chair, processing the challenges ahead. Through the glass, she watched Oliver's retreating figure, noting how he paused briefly to stare down Richard before leaving the floor. The butterflies returned to her stomach, and this time she couldn't blame them entirely on work stress. What she didn't know was that the leaked article was just the opening move in a carefully orchestrated plan to undermine not just her position, but the entire Sterling-Kensington partnership, a plan that would soon force her to prove herself in ways she never imagined. The Dorchester Hotel's ballroom buzzed with anticipation as journalists and real estate industry insiders gathered for the hastily arranged press conference. Behind the scenes, Emma stood before a mirror, barely recognizing herself in the elegant navy suit Charlotte Sterling had helped her select that morning. "Remember," Charlotte said, adjusting Emma's collar, "you've earned this position. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." Oliver's sister shared his commanding presence, but paired it with a warmth that had made Emma instantly comfortable during their pre-dawn shopping expedition. "The vultures are circling," Victoria announced, striding into the preparation room with her tablet. "Every major business publication is here, and they're all running variations of this morning's leak." Emma squared her shoulders, reviewing her notes one last time. The door opened again, and Oliver entered, his presence immediately filling the room. Their eyes met in the mirror, and he gave her an encouraging nod that sent a wave of warmth through her chest. "Ready?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. "As I'll ever be," Emma replied, tucking away her notes. She wouldn't need them. She knew exactly what needed to be said. The lights in the ballroom were blinding as Emma took her place at the podium, flanked by Oliver and Victoria. Camera shutters clicked rapidly, and she could feel the skepticism emanating from the assembled press corps. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and steady. "Yesterday, an article suggested that my appointment to lead Kensington Crown Properties transformation was controversial and ill-conceived. Today I'm here to tell you why that article got it exactly wrong." In the front row, she spotted Richard and James, who hadn't been invited but had somehow gained entry. Their presence only strengthened her resolve. For too long, the luxury real estate industry has operated under the assumption that exclusivity means exclusion, that prestige requires prejudice, that wealth warrants preferential treatment while potential should be dismissed based on appearances. She paused, letting her words sink in. These assumptions aren't just morally wrong, they're bad business. Every person who walks through our doors carries dreams, aspirations, and yes, potential. Our job isn't to judge that potential, but to help realize it. Emma outlined her vision for the company's transformation, including new training programs, revised customer service protocols, and a revolutionary client-centric approach to luxury real estate. As she spoke, she could feel the room's energy shifting from skepticism to interest. Then came the questions. "Ms. Thompson, called out a reporter from the Financial Times. "How do you respond to claims that your rapid promotion is more about public relations than qualification?" Before Emma could answer, Oliver stepped forward. "If I may?" At Emma's nod, he continued, "When I visited Kensington Crown Properties in disguise, I wasn't just testing their customer service. I was looking for someone who understood that true luxury isn't about price tags. It's about creating an experience that makes every client feel valued." His gaze swept the room. "Ms. Thompson didn't just pass that test. She revealed that she possesses the very qualities our industry desperately needs. Sometimes the view from the reception desk provides better insights than any corner office." The press conference continued, with Emma handling increasingly challenging questions with poise and clarity. When it was over, even Victoria looked impressed. As the crowd dispersed, Emma noticed James approaching Oliver with an obsequious smile. "Mr. Sterling, if I might have a moment of your time, I have some concerns about the direction of these changes." Oliver's response was polite but firm. "Any concerns about the company's direction should be addressed to Ms. Thompson. She has my complete confidence and authority in these matters." Later, in Emma's office, the senior staff gathered for their first transformation committee meeting. As she presented her initial action plans, she couldn't help but notice the variety of reactions. Genuine enthusiasm from some, careful neutrality from others, and barely concealed hostility from a few. "These changes will be implemented gradually but firmly," Emma concluded. "I understand change is difficult, but—" She was interrupted by a commotion outside. The office's security system had suddenly activated, sealing all electronic doors and shutting down the computers. Through the glass walls, she could see panic spreading across the office floor. "It's a technical malfunction," Richard announced smoothly. "I'm sure it will resolve itself shortly." But Emma caught the gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. This was no malfunction. It was the first real attack in what would become an increasingly sophisticated campaign of sabotage. What worried her most wasn't the technical disruption, but the message behind it. Someone was willing to harm the entire company just to undermine her leadership. As Oliver worked with the IT team to restore systems, he and Emma exchanged a knowing look. They were dealing with something more complex than simple resistance to change. Someone had a deeper agenda, and discovering it would require more than just corporate reforms. What neither of them realized was that the real threat wasn't just to Emma's position or the company's transformation. It was to a secret that could shake London's entire luxury real estate market to its core. The evening lights of London twinkled beyond the windows of Oliver Sterling's private office in the Sterling Tower. Emma sat across from him, both of them reviewing security footage from the system shutdown incident. The sleek office, with its minimalist design and spectacular city views, seemed a world away from the chaos they'd experienced earlier that day. "There," Emma pointed at the screen. "Look at Richard's expression when the systems went down. He wasn't surprised at all." Oliver leaned closer, his shoulder barely brushing hers. Emma tried to ignore the slight shiver that ran through her at the contact. "Good catch," he murmured. "But proving it is another matter entirely." Charlotte Sterling swept into the office carrying a thick folder. "You two need to see this," she said, spreading documents across Oliver's desk. "I've been doing some digging into Richard Blake's history. It seems our problematic agent has some interesting connections." Emma and Oliver moved to examine the papers, their heads close together as they studied the information. "He worked for Platinum Elite Properties before joining Kensington," Emma noted, scanning the employment history. "Platinum Elite," Oliver repeated thoughtfully. "They've been trying to acquire Kensington Crown for years. Victoria always refused their offers." "That's not all," Charlotte continued. "Look at his financial records from the past 3 months. Regular payments from an offshore account, starting the day after your partnership announcement." Emma felt Oliver stiffen beside her. "Someone's paying him to sabotage the transformation," she concluded. "But why? What's really at stake here?" Before anyone could respond, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Emergency at the office. Need you here now." 20 minutes later, Emma rushed through Kensington Crown's doors to find the office in an uproar. Dozens of their most prestigious clients had received emails, apparently from the company's official address, announcing that due to the recent inexperienced leadership, their properties would be withdrawn from the agency's listings. "It's a disaster," Victoria said, pacing the conference room. The phones haven't stopped ringing. We've already lost 3 major listings. Emma took a deep breath, her mind racing. First, we need to send an immediate correction to all clients. Then, we trace the source of those emails. She turned to Oliver, who had followed her to the office. Can your IT team help? He was already on his phone. They're on their way, but Emma... He hesitated. There's something else you should know. Something I should have told you earlier. The gravity in his voice made her heart skip. What is it? The reason I was so interested in partnering with Kensington Crown, it wasn't just about business. I received information that someone was using luxury real estate agencies to... A commotion outside interrupted him. James burst into the room, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. You need to see this, he said, turning on the large screen. A breaking news story filled the display. Major money laundering operation uncovered in London's luxury real estate market. Emma felt the blood drain from her face as she read further. The article mentioned several agencies under investigation, including Platinum Elite Properties and Kensington Crown. This is what you were investigating? She asked Oliver quietly. He nodded. I had suspicions that certain agencies were being used to move illegal funds through property transactions. When I heard rumors about Kensington Crown, I needed to know if the corruption went all the way through. And that's why you tested us, Emma realized. You weren't just looking for good customer service. You were looking for integrity. Finding you was an unexpected bonus, he admitted, his eyes softening as they met hers. Someone who couldn't be bought, who treated everyone with equal respect regardless of their apparent wealth. James cleared his throat awkwardly. There's more. Richard, he's gone. His office is cleaned out, and he left this. He handed Emma an envelope. Inside was a simple note. You should have stayed at the reception desk, Emma. Some doors are better left unopened. Emma felt Oliver's hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. He's trying to frighten you, he said softly. Well, it's not working, Emma replied, straightening her spine. If anything, this proves we're on the right track. Victoria, call all senior staff to the conference room. It's time we put all our cards on the table. As the team assembled, Emma couldn't help but notice how James kept checking his phone nervously. There was something in his manner that suggested he knew more than he was saying. But before she could question him, another crisis demanded their attention. The company's client database had been completely wiped clean. What no one in the room realized was that this apparent disaster would lead them to uncover a conspiracy far larger than anyone had imagined, one that would test not just Emma's leadership abilities, but also the growing connection between her and Oliver in ways neither of them could have predicted. The soft glow of dawn was breaking over London as Emma sat in her office, surrounded by papers and multiple computer screens. She had been there all night, working with Oliver's cybersecurity team to salvage what they could from the compromised database. Her jacket was draped over a chair, her sleeves rolled up, and an empty coffee cup sat beside her keyboard. You should get some rest, Oliver's voice came from the doorway. He looked as impeccable as ever despite the early hour, carrying 2 fresh coffees and a paper bag that smelled of freshly baked pastries. I think I found something, Emma said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Look at these transaction patterns. She pulled up a series of spreadsheets she had managed to recover. Every time a high-value property was sold, there was a corresponding series of smaller transactions through various shell companies. Oliver leaned over her shoulder, his cologne temporarily distracting her from the numbers on the screen. Money laundering, he confirmed. But this is more sophisticated than I expected. That's not all, Emma continued, fighting to maintain her professional focus. James has been accessing these records regularly, but not during office hours. I checked the building's security logs. He's been coming in at midnight almost every day for the past month. A knock at the door interrupted them. Charlotte entered, looking triumphant. We got him, she announced. Richard Blake just boarded a flight to Geneva, but not before transferring a significant sum to an account linked to Platinum Elite's CEO. What I don't understand, Emma said, standing to stretch her tired muscles, is why they're so desperate to stop our reforms. Surely better customer service doesn't threaten their operation that much. Oliver and Charlotte exchanged meaningful looks. Unless, Oliver said slowly, your new transparency policies would make it impossible to continue hiding these transactions. Emma was about to respond when her computer chimed with an incoming email. Her eyes widened as she read it. It's from James. He wants to meet alone. Says he has information we need, but he'll only share it with me. Absolutely not, Oliver said immediately. It's too risky. I agree, Charlotte added. After what happened with Richard, I think we should do it, Emma interrupted. But not alone and not without preparation. Over the next hour, they developed a plan. The meeting would take place at the Shard's observation deck, public enough to be safe, but private enough for a confidential conversation. Oliver's security team would be scattered throughout the venue, and Emma would be wearing a discreet communication device. That afternoon, Emma stood looking out over London's sprawling cityscape, waiting. She felt, rather than heard, Oliver's voice through her earpiece. We've got eyes on James. He just entered the building. Minutes later, James appeared, looking nothing like his usually polished self. His eyes were shadowed, his expensive suit wrinkled. Thank you for coming, he said, glancing nervously around. I'm sorry about everything. Why don't you tell me what's really going on? Emma suggested gently. James ran a hand through his disheveled hair. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Richard, he promised it would just be minor sabotage, enough to make you quit. But then I found out what they were really doing with the properties, the money they were moving. Why come forward now? Because they're planning something big, James said, lowering his voice. The database wipe wasn't just about destroying records, it was about hiding something specific. A pattern of transactions involving properties that don't actually exist. Emma felt her pulse quicken. Ghost properties. Entire developments. On paper, they're luxury apartment complexes and exclusive estates. In reality, he pulled out a USB drive. Everything's here. But Emma, these people, they're not just real estate agents. They're working for someone much more powerful. Before he could continue, a group of tourists approached their section of the observation deck. James tensed visibly. I can't be seen here longer. Take this. But be careful who you trust with it. He pressed the drive into her hand and hurried toward the exit. Back in Oliver's office, they examined the contents of the drive. What they found made Emma's blood run cold. The money laundering operation was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind it lay a complex web of fraud that reached into the highest levels of London's business elite. Look at this name, Oliver said, pointing to a document. Sebastian Montgomery. He's one of the most influential property developers in Europe. If he's involved, then we're dealing with something much bigger than we thought, Emma finished. She looked up at Oliver, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Why do I get the feeling you're not entirely surprised by this? Oliver's expression was complicated. Because Sebastian Montgomery is the reason I started investigating in the first place. He's also my former mentor, and the man who nearly destroyed my family's company 15 years ago. Emma reached out instinctively, placing her hand over his. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through both of them. For a moment they stayed frozen, the weight of their discoveries and their growing feelings for each other hanging in the air between them. Then Charlotte burst in, breaking the moment. We have a problem, she announced. James never made it home, and Sebastian Montgomery just called an emergency board meeting at Platinum Elite Properties. The game was changing, the stakes rising. What had started as a simple test of customer service had evolved into something far more dangerous and far more personal than anyone could have anticipated. What Emma didn't know was that the next 24 hours would force her to make a choice between protecting the company she was trying to transform and the man she was rapidly falling in love with. The rain pattered against the windows of Emma's apartment as she pored over the documents from James's USB drive for the 100th time. Her living room had been transformed into an investigation headquarters, with papers covering every surface and her laptop displaying complex financial charts. The soft knock at her door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw Oliver standing in the hallway, rain dripping from his coat. Her heart did a familiar flutter as she opened the door. You shouldn't be here, she said, even as she stepped aside to let him in. If Montgomery has people watching, they're watching the office and my residence, Oliver replied, shrugging off his wet coat. Charlotte's team made sure I wasn't followed here. He paused, taking in the organized chaos of her living room. You've been busy. I think I found something, Emma said, leading him to her makeshift investigation board. These 5 developments that James mentioned, the ghost properties, they're all registered to different shell companies, but look at the architectural plans. Oliver leaned in, his shoulder brushing hers as he studied the documents. They're nearly identical. Exactly. And each one supposedly sold out within days of launching, generating hundreds of millions in transactions. But here's the interesting part. The land these developments are supposedly built on. Emma pulled up satellite images on her laptop. They don't exist. The addresses are real, but they lead to empty lots or existing buildings. Perfect vehicles for money laundering, Oliver muttered. Create fake luxury developments, sell non-existent units to shell companies, move massive amounts of money through the system. He straightened up, running a hand through his damp hair. But why involve Kensington Crown? Because they needed a legitimate agency to make it all look real, Emma realized. Your partnership announcement threatened that. Not because of the customer service reforms, but because I would have access to all their records during the due diligence process, Oliver finished. Their eyes met in shared understanding. Emma felt the energy shift in the room. They were standing close, too close for colleagues, too close for comfort. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows. Emma, Oliver said softly, there's something else you should know. The reason Montgomery turned against my family. He took a deep breath. He wanted to use our company for a similar scheme. When my father refused, Montgomery orchestrated a financial crisis that nearly bankrupted us. My father, the stress of it all. Emma instinctively reached for his hand. That's why this is so personal for you. Oliver's fingers intertwined with hers. I spent years rebuilding what he tried to destroy. When I heard rumors about similar patterns happening again, I had to investigate. Finding you in the middle of it all? He smiled slightly. That wasn't part of the plan. Plans change, Emma whispered. The tension between them was electric. Years of buried feelings and professional barriers crumbling in the intimacy of the moment. Oliver's free hand moved to her cheek, and Emma felt herself leaning into his touch. Just as their lips were about to meet, her phone buzzed violently on the coffee table. It was Victoria. Emma, you need to turn on the news, now. With trembling fingers, Emma grabbed her remote. The business news channel filled her screen, showing Sebastian Montgomery standing at a podium. Allegations of impropriety at Kensington Crown Properties, Montgomery was saying, his silver hair and expensive suit projecting authority. As a concerned member of London's real estate community, I feel compelled to bring these irregularities to light. He's getting ahead of the story, Oliver said grimly, discrediting Kensington Crown before we can expose him. Emma's phone buzzed again, this time with an email. Her face paled as she read it. It's from Montgomery's office. He's calling for an emergency meeting of the London Real Estate Association tomorrow morning. They're moving to suspend Kensington Crown's license pending investigation. Can they do that? With Montgomery's influence? Absolutely. And without a license, the company dies, Oliver finished, along with any chance of exposing what they're really doing. Emma stood, determination replacing shock. Then, we have until morning to prove what's really going on. But Oliver, she met his eyes. If we do this, if we expose Montgomery, the scandal could affect Sterling Development too. Your reputation, everything you've rebuilt. Oliver stepped closer, taking both her hands in his. Some things are worth the risk. The moment was interrupted by another call. Charlotte this time. We found James, she said without preamble. He left a message for Emma, says he knows where the original documents are, the ones that would prove everything. But he'll only give them to her, in person, tonight. Emma and Oliver exchanged looks. They both knew it could be a trap, but it might also be their only chance to save Kensington Crown and stop Montgomery once and for all. What they didn't know was that their decision that night would set in motion a chain of events that would force them to choose between justice and safety, between professional duty and personal happiness, in ways neither of them could have imagined. The vintage elevator creaked as it ascended to the top floor of the abandoned Whitehall Court building. Emma stood beside Oliver, both tense with anticipation. Despite his protests, she had insisted he accompany her to meet James, though Charlotte's security team remained discreetly positioned throughout the building. This was one of Montgomery's first development projects, Oliver explained quietly. Before it all went wrong. The building's been empty for years waiting for renovation permits. The elevator shuddered to a stop. The top floor was a vast, empty space, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of London's glittering nightscape. James stood near one of the windows, his silhouette stark against the city lights. "I said come alone," he called out, not turning around. "And I decided that wasn't the wisest choice," Emma replied, stepping forward with Oliver close behind. "You have something to show us?" James finally turned, and Emma was struck by how haggard he looked. "You don't understand what you're up against," he said. "Montgomery, he doesn't just destroy businesses, he destroys lives." "We know about the ghost developments," Oliver said. "We know about the money laundering. What we need is proof." James pulled out a leather portfolio. "It's all here. Every transaction, every shell company, every fake development." Montgomery was careful, but he kept records. Insurance, he called it. Protection against anyone who might betray him. "Like you're doing now," a new voice called from the shadows. Emma's blood ran cold as Richard Blake stepped into the light, followed by two men in expensive suits. Sebastian Montgomery himself emerged last, his silver hair gleaming in the dim light. "Oliver," Montgomery said warmly, as if greeting an old friend, "I should have known you'd be involved, still trying to prove yourself worthy of the sterling name." "Sebastian," Oliver's voice was ice, "still hiding behind fake developments and stolen money." Montgomery laughed, the sound echoing through the empty space. "Stolen. I prefer to think of it as redistributed. The real estate market is just a game, my boy. Some of us just play it better than others." "It's not a game," Emma stepped forward. "It's people's lives, their homes, their dreams, their trust." "Ah, yes, the principled Ms. Thompson." Montgomery's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The receptionist who dared to dream bigger. Do you know why I chose Kensington Crown for our operation?" He gestured to Richard. "Show them." Richard opened his laptop, turning it to display a familiar face. Emma's father, 20 years younger, in what appeared to be a police interview room. "Robert Thompson," Montgomery continued. "One of the few people who could have exposed my early ventures, until a well-timed embezzlement charge convinced him to stay quiet. Tell me, Emma, did he ever tell you why he really left the real estate business?" Emma felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. Her father's sudden career change, their family's unexpected move from London to Manchester, the years of quiet shame he carried, it all made terrible sense. "You destroyed his life," she whispered. "I offered him a choice," Montgomery corrected. "The same choice I'm offering you now. Walk away. All of you. The evidence you've gathered will vanish, and with it any threat to your reputations, your careers, your families. And if we don't?" Oliver's hand found Emma's, squeezing gently. "Then history repeats itself. Though this time," Montgomery's voice hardened, "I won't be as merciful as I was with your father, Oliver, or yours, Emma." James suddenly moved, trying to hand the portfolio to Emma, but Richard was faster. In the ensuing scuffle, papers scattered across the floor, dancing in the breeze from a broken window. "Enough!" Montgomery's voice cracked like a whip. "You have until morning to decide. Either announce that your investigation found nothing improper and step down from your positions, or—" He let the threat hang in the air. As Montgomery and his men turned to leave, taking a struggling James with them, he paused. "Oh, and that touching scene in your apartment earlier? Consider it a warning. Nowhere is private. No one is safe." After they left, Emma and Oliver stood in the empty space, surrounded by scattered papers and shattered illusions. "He's been watching us all along," Emma said quietly. "Everything, the customer service test, my promotion, our investigation, he orchestrated all of it." "Not all of it," Oliver turned to face her. "He couldn't have orchestrated this." His hand cupped her cheek, and this time there was no phone call to interrupt them as his lips met hers in a kiss that felt like both an ending and a beginning. When they finally parted, Emma rested her forehead against his. "What do we do now?" Oliver smiled slightly. Now we do what neither of our fathers could. We fight back." What they didn't realize was that among the scattered papers lay a single document that would change everything. A document that proved Montgomery's entire empire was built on an unexpected foundation of betrayal that hit much closer to home than either of them could have imagined. Dawn was breaking over London as Emma and Oliver sat in Charlotte's private office, surrounded by the papers they'd gathered from the abandoned building. They'd been there all night, analyzing every document, looking for anything that could help them fight back against Montgomery. "Look at this," Charlotte said suddenly, holding up a faded document. "It's dated 15 years ago, right before Montgomery turned against Sterling Development." Emma leaned in, her eyes widening as she read. The paper was a partnership agreement between Montgomery and another party, not Sterling Development, but a different company entirely. Victoria Blackwood Holdings, Emma read aloud. But that's Kensington Crown's parent company, Oliver finished, his expression darkening. Victoria never mentioned any connection to Montgomery. Charlotte spread more papers across the desk. Because according to these records, she was working with him to acquire Sterling Development. The hostile takeover wasn't just Montgomery. It was a joint effort. But it failed, Emma said, pieces clicking into place. And instead of exposing Victoria's involvement, Montgomery kept it secret. Why? Oliver was already pulling up more recent documents on his laptop. Because he needed her. Look at the ownership structure of those ghost developments. Every single one has a small stake held by Victoria Blackwood Holdings. She's been his silent partner all along, Charlotte breathed. The money laundering, the fake developments. Kensington Crown wasn't just a convenient front. It was integral to the whole operation. Emma felt her world tilting on its axis. Victoria had been her mentor, had supported her promotion, had seemed to stand behind their reforms. All this time, she said quietly, she's been reporting everything back to Montgomery. That's why he knew about us, Oliver added, reaching for her hand. Victoria must have security cameras in your office, in the building. In my apartment, Emma finished. She gave me that place as a company perk when I took the new position. She stood abruptly, anger replacing shock. We need to move fast. Montgomery gave us until morning to back down. We've got 2 hours before the Real Estate Association meeting. Charlotte checked her watch. But what's our play? Victoria will deny everything and Montgomery's influence runs deep. Emma's eyes fell on a small note in the corner of one document. Wait, what's Project Legacy? Oliver frowned, scanning through files on his laptop. It's mentioned several times in the recent transactions, but there's no detail about what it is. Here, Charlotte pulled up an email chain. Something about a major development announcement scheduled for today's meeting. Montgomery's planning to unveil his biggest project yet, using Kensington Crown as the official agency, Emma added. That's why the timing of all this is so crucial. He needs our reputation to legitimize whatever he's planning. Oliver's phone buzzed. A message from his security team. James is asking to meet again. Says he knows what Project Legacy is, but he'll only talk if we can protect him. It's risky, Charlotte warned. Montgomery's people will be watching him. Then we don't meet him, Emma said, an idea forming. We bring him to us, very publicly. Over the next hour, they put their plan into motion. Charlotte arranged for a press contingent to be waiting outside Kensington Crown's offices. Oliver's security team quietly positioned themselves throughout the building. And Emma prepared to take the biggest gamble of her career. As she stood in her office, preparing for what was to come, Oliver joined her by the window. Are you sure about this? He asked softly. Once we start, there's no going back. Emma turned to face him, struck by how natural it felt now to be close to him, to let her professional mask slip just a little. Montgomery tried to destroy both our families, she said. He's been manipulating all of us, thinking we'd be too afraid to fight back. But he made one crucial mistake. What's that? A small smile played at her lips. He underestimated what people will do for the ones they love. Oliver's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. I suppose he did, he murmured, before pulling her into a kiss that felt like a promise. The moment was interrupted by Charlotte clearing her throat from the doorway. Sorry to break this up, but Victoria just arrived. Showtime. What no one in the room realized was that Project Legacy wasn't just another ghost development. It was something far more personal, and its revelation would force both Emma and Oliver to confront painful truths about their families' pasts that would test their newfound relationship in ways they never expected. And she's not alone. Emma straightened her jacket, professional mask sliding back into place. The Kensington Crown conference room crackled with tension as Victoria Blackwood strode in, followed by Sebastian Montgomery and his entourage. Emma stood at the head of the table, Oliver and Charlotte flanking her, as reporters gathered outside the glass walls, their cameras already rolling. What is the meaning of this? Victoria demanded, taking in the scene. The Real Estate Association meeting begins in an hour. Yes, Emma interrupted smoothly. Perfect timing for a press conference about Project Legacy, wouldn't you say? The color drained from Montgomery's face. "You're bluffing. You don't know anything about legacy." "Don't I?" Emma pressed a button and the large screen behind her came to life. Project Legacy, the culmination of a 15-year plan to consolidate control of London's luxury real estate market through a network of ghost developments and shell companies. Documents began scrolling across the screen. Partnership agreements, bank transfers, architectural plans. Victoria's hand tightened on her designer handbag. "These are confidential company documents. You have no right—" "Actually," Oliver stepped forward, "as your business partner, I have every right. Especially when those documents reveal a conspiracy that began with an attempted hostile takeover of Sterling Development 15 years ago." James slipped into the room, avoiding Montgomery's murderous glare. He placed a USB drive on the table. "The complete Project Legacy files," he said quietly, "including the real reason behind Robert Thompson's disgrace and Charles Sterling's departure from the industry." Emma's heart pounded as she pulled up the final document, a yellowed contract dated 20 years ago. "This is where it all began, isn't it? A partnership between 3 young real estate agents, Sebastian Montgomery, Victoria Blackwood, and Charles Sterling, Oliver's father." The room fell silent as Emma continued. "You were going to revolutionize London's property market together. But then Charles discovered your plans to use the business for money laundering when he threatened to expose you. We gave him a choice," Montgomery cut in, his composure cracking. "The same choice we gave your father when he stumbled upon our operation years later. The same choice I'm giving you now." "But it wasn't just about silence, was it?" Oliver's voice was quiet but carried throughout the room. "Project Legacy is your masterpiece, a plan to take control of every major luxury development in London. And you needed the Sterling and Thompson names to make it legitimate." Victoria laughed, but there was a note of hysteria in it. "You can't prove any of this. It's all circumstantial." "Actually," Charlotte interrupted, opening the door to reveal a familiar face, "we can." Charles Sterling walked in, older than in the photographs, but still carrying himself with dignity. Oliver's breath caught. He hadn't seen his father in years. "Hello, Sebastian," Charles said calmly. "Victoria, I believe it's time we finished that conversation we started 15 years ago." Montgomery's mask finally cracked. "You disappeared. We made sure of it." "I left," Charles corrected, "to protect my family. But I never stopped gathering evidence." He turned to Oliver. "I'm sorry, son. I should have told you the truth years ago." Emma watched the interplay of emotions across Oliver's face. Shock, understanding, forgiveness. She stepped forward, addressing the captivated reporters beyond the glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've called you here today to announce a major restructuring of Kensington Crown Properties. Under its new management, we will be cooperating fully with authorities regarding certain irregularities discovered in our recent audit." Victoria lunged for the door, but Charlotte's security team smoothly blocked her exit. Montgomery remained frozen, watching years of careful planning crumble around him. "You've lost, Sebastian," Charles said quietly. "The evidence has already been sent to the authorities. Project Legacy dies today." As if on cue, Emma's phone buzzed with news alerts. Major fraud investigation launched into London property market. Platinum Elite Properties raided by Financial Crimes Unit. Ghost development scheme uncovered. The next hour passed in a blur of police arrivals, formal statements, and camera flashes. Through it all, Emma felt Oliver's steady presence beside her, their hands occasionally brushing in subtle gestures of support. When the dust finally began to settle, they found themselves alone in her office, watching Victoria and Montgomery being escorted from the building. "Your father," Emma said softly. "You knew he would come." Oliver shook his head. "Charlotte found him, convinced him it was time to tell the truth." He turned to her, his eyes intense. "Emma, But before he could finish, James burst in. "You need to see this," he said urgently. "We found something else in the legacy files, something about Emma's father. What they discovered in those files would change everything they thought they knew about the past and force them to make one final choice about their future." The evening sun cast long shadows through Emma's office windows as she stared at the document James had discovered. Her hands trembled slightly as she read, Oliver's comforting presence beside her the only thing keeping her grounded. "All this time," she whispered, We thought my father was a victim of Montgomery's schemes, but he was actually a whistleblower, Oliver finished, reading over her shoulder. He wasn't forced out because he discovered their fraud. He was forced out because he was gathering evidence against them. The documents revealed a carefully orchestrated investigation. Robert Thompson had spent months collecting proof of Montgomery and Victoria's illegal activities, working secretly with financial authorities. But before he could submit his final report, Montgomery had discovered his plans. The embezzlement charges were fabricated, Charles Sterling added, joining them in the office. Sebastian's specialty, creating paper trails that never existed. He used the same technique against me years later. Emma sank into her chair, memories flooding back. The night we left London, Dad was so adamant about leaving immediately. He barely let us pack. She looked up at Charles. Did you know? Not then, he admitted. But later, in exile, Robert found me. We've been building a case together ever since, waiting for the right moment. When Oliver began investigating Kensington Crown, you knew it was time, Oliver finished. His hand found Emma's shoulder, squeezing gently. James cleared his throat. There's more. According to these records, Robert Thompson's evidence didn't die with his exile. He hid copies somewhere in London before he left. Emma's eyes widened. The old house. Dad always said he left something valuable behind, but he could never go back for it. She stood abruptly. I know where it is. An hour later, they stood in the basement of a modest Victorian house in North London. Emma's childhood home had changed little in the intervening years. The current owners, sympathetic to their story, had granted them access to search. Here, Emma said, running her fingers along the old brick wall. Dad used to tell me stories about a secret compartment he built. I always thought it was just a bedtime tale. Oliver helped her press the loose bricks, and suddenly a small section of wall shifted. Behind it lay a metal box, dusty but intact. Inside they found a treasure trove, documents, photographs, and a detailed record of Montgomery's earliest schemes. But most surprisingly, they found letters, dozens of them, from Robert Thompson to his daughter. My dearest Emma, she read, tears threatening. If you're reading this, then the truth has finally come to light. I couldn't tell you why we had to leave. It was safer that way. But I never stopped fighting for justice, and I never stopped hoping that someday you would understand. Oliver wrapped an arm around her as she read, offering silent support. Charles watched them with a knowing smile. Your father never gave up, he said softly. He's been waiting in Manchester all these years, helping us build our case from the shadows. Would you like to call him? Emma looked up from the letters, determination replacing tears. No, she said. I want to tell him in person. But first we have one last thing to do. The next morning, the London Real Estate Association convened as planned. But instead of Montgomery's triumphant announcement of Project Legacy, they watched as Emma and Oliver presented irrefutable evidence of decades of fraud. With Robert Thompson and Charles Sterling's meticulous documentation, combined with their own investigation, the case was undeniable. As reporters clamored for statements and officials began formal proceedings, Emma felt a profound sense of completion. Her father's name would be cleared, justice would be served, and the industry would undergo the transformation she had dreamed of. True reform, built on integrity and transparency. Later, in the quiet of Oliver's office high above London, they finally had a moment alone. What happens now? Emma asked, watching the city lights begin to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Oliver turned her to face him, his eyes soft with emotion. Now, he said, we build something new, together. As he drew her into a kiss, Emma realized that sometimes the greatest legacy isn't what we build, but who we become while building it. What they didn't know was that their story would inspire one final transformation, one that would reach far beyond the world of luxury real estate and touch lives in ways they never imagined. 6 months later, the newly renovated headquarters of Sterling Thompson Properties gleamed in the spring sunshine. The merged company, born from the ashes of scandal, had become a symbol of transformation in London's real estate industry. Emma stood at the podium in the building's grand atrium, addressing a crowd of industry leaders, press and employees. Behind her, a banner proclaimed the launch of the Legacy of Integrity initiative, a comprehensive industry reform program that had already been adopted by dozens of agencies across Europe. Real estate isn't just about properties, she said, her voice clear and confident. It's about people, about dreams, about trust. Her eyes found Oliver's in the audience and she smiled. Sometimes the most valuable things we build aren't made of brick and mortar, but of courage, integrity, and love. In the front row, Robert Thompson beamed with pride. His return to London had been triumphant. His name fully cleared, his reputation restored. Now he served as the head of their new ethics and compliance division, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. Beside him sat Charles Sterling, who had emerged from his self-imposed exile to help reshape the industry he'd once fled. The reconciliation between father and son had healed wounds that went far deeper than business rivalries. As Emma concluded her speech, announcing the company's new charitable foundation to help provide affordable housing in London, she reflected on how much had changed. Richard and Victoria were awaiting trial, along with Montgomery. James, after providing key testimony, had found redemption leading their new agent training program, teaching the values of ethical business practices. The reception afterward was held in the rooftop garden, another of Emma's innovations, making luxury real estate more environmentally conscious. As clients and colleagues mingled, she found a quiet moment with Oliver near the edge of the terrace. "Father's just told me the foundation's first project has been approved," Oliver said, handing her a glass of champagne. "We're converting one of Montgomery's ghost developments into affordable apartments for young families." "Perfect poetic justice," Emma smiled. "Speaking of justice, Charlotte mentioned you received an interesting offer." Oliver nodded. "The Real Estate Association wants me to chair their new ethics committee." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally. "I told them I'd only do it if we could co-chair." "Us? Leading industry reform together?" Emma pretended to consider it. "I suppose we make a decent team." "More than decent," Oliver murmured, pulling her closer. "Which reminds me." He reached into his pocket. Emma's breath caught as he produced a small velvet box. "Oliver, I had this whole speech prepared," he said softly. "About how you made me believe in second chances, about how you showed me that true luxury isn't about price tags or postcodes, but about treating everyone with dignity and respect." He opened the box, revealing a stunning vintage ring. "But really, it comes down to this. I love you, Emma Thompson. Will you marry me?" Through tears of joy, Emma managed to whisper, "Yes." The sunset painted the London skyline in shades of gold as their colleagues erupted in applause and congratulations. Charles and Robert exchanged knowing looks. Their children had not only righted old wrongs, but had found something precious in the process. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Emma and Oliver stood together at the terrace railing, looking out over the city they'd helped transform. "You know," Emma said thoughtfully, "when you walked into Kensington Crown that day in your disguise, I knew there was something special about you." Oliver laughed. "And here I thought I was being so clever." "You were," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "But some things you can't disguise. Like integrity, like kindness." She turned to face him. "Like love." As they sealed their future with a kiss, the city lights twinkled below like stars, witnesses to a new legacy being born, one built not on deception and greed, but on trust, justice, and the courage to fight for what's right. In the end, the true legacy wasn't just the transformation of an industry or the triumph of justice. It was the proof that one person's integrity could spark a revolution, that love could grow in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest achievements come not from tearing things down, but from building something new together.